Good evening, everyone. My name is Antonia Wunderlich, and on behalf of the British-German Association, I would like to welcome you to this online event. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, the British-German Association is a charity and membership organisation founded 70 years ago that promotes mutual understanding and good relations between the UK and Germany. Part of what we do is to provide a vibrant forum for debates, talks, discussions, and learning about Germany. So we regularly put on events such as this one, along with other initiatives such as our monthly newsletter. We're delighted that this evening's event is in collaboration with the International Association for the Study of German Politics, which devotes itself to the academic study of the politics, economics, international relations, and society of contemporary Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So thank you to the ISGP. You can find out more about the BGA and the ISGP by following the two links in the chat. Before handing over to our moderator, Ed Turner, to introduce our speakers, a quick note on the technology. There will be a Q&A session after the discussion, and the Q&A will be conducted by the Q&A function, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you click on it, you can start typing up and sending in questions, and please feel free to do so over the course of the event. You can also like someone else's question, and the more likes a question gets, the higher up it is on the list. So on that note, over to you, Ed.
Thanks very much indeed, Antonia, and a warm welcome to everyone who's joining. One thing you will have noticed is this particular event, of course, has been rearranged, and it was rearranged because of a football match. And I just thought it would be a shame not to mention to people that that was so. The football match took place, and a very memorable match it was too. But without rubbing any more salt in that particular wound, I'm really pleased to have with us tonight two great speakers to talk about the elections, starting with Jana Faus. Jana is a founder of a major political strategy agency called pollytix, is a prolific social media user communicating about politics, has written very widely on a range of topics. If people can read German, I particularly actually recommend her work on reunited Germany. And also she was one of the people brought in by the SPD after the last federal election to analyse what went wrong and what could go better by the SPD. I think she's probably the only German election with an Australian accent. So, Jana, thanks for joining us. And Christian Stecker is a member of our association, the International Association for the Study of German Politics. He's one of, I hope he doesn't mind me saying, one of the most exciting, dynamic, empirical political scientists in Germany at the moment of his generation. He previously spent much of his career in Mannheim, which is a beating heart of German empirical political science. And he's now working as a professor at the Technical University in Darmstadt, and is a real expert, particularly on coalition politics. So thanks to you both. My understanding is, Jana, you're going to start off with some slides, then Christian will move on to you with some slides, but both our speakers have suggested they want to leave lots of time for Q&A. And we will wrap up promptly at 7:30 British time, 8:30 German time. So Jana, the floor is yours, and thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much for all the lovely words. Yeah, well, I'm very excited talking about the upcoming election in Germany, which is in 80 days, I assume, and is going to be really different to the ones we've seen in the last 2 decades. So let's take a quick look at what is happening to set the scene for our discussion. So I show you some polling trends since the last 4 years, where the Conservatives and the SPD formed the government. So what we basically see is that the Conservatives are always on top, leading. However, the Greens kind of, picking up here quite dramatically. I'm sorry. Whilst here we see something has been changing. So what has been changing? Well, that was Corona, and leading to a really big increase for the Conservatives and decline for the Greens. However, the Social Democrats basically are, somewhere around 15 or 16% ever since. So how was that when we look at the election in 2013 and 2017, basically the last 9 months before the election, not a lot have changed, as you can clearly see. So obviously the right-wing AfD came to the scene and the Greens kind of lost ground, but it was kind of, a bit boring, stable, so to speak. 2017 seems to be a little bit different, as we see here, kind of a, as we do see here, kind of a, the SPD on the rise. What happened there? Schulz kind of was the candidate, and he was like everyone projected what they wanted to see in him. However, he could not live up to expectations, and the SPD, just had 20.5% at the end. However, even there, if we looked at the last 90 days, I've said it's 80 days from now to this year's election, nothing has really changed. It was just flat. This time round, things have changed a little bit. So I've shown you the graph since July 2020, where, very early the SPD decided that they want to nominate Olaf Scholz as their candidate. Slightly picking up for the Social Democrats. However, nothing really changed until here. We see this massive decline for the Conservatives. Basically, it was all about, will it be Söder, will it be Laschet? It was all about internal discussions, and was all about Corona and the mismanagement of Corona and the corruption scandals. But you can also see here this green arrow indicating when Annalena Baerbock, the candidate for the Greens, was nominated. You see this, incline. They really were picking up. However, you can also see this wasn't lasting very long, and we talk about why that is in a second. So it's basically, this election campaign seems to be all about the three candidates. So Annalena Baerbock for the Greens, Armin Laschet for the Conservatives, and Olaf Scholz for the Social Democrats. At the moment, what we do see is it's really dirty campaigns. We don't talk a lot about topics. We don't talk about transformation. We don't talk about digitalization. We don't talk about climate change. Basically, we just talk about whether is Annalena Baerbock lacking experience, or is she qualified enough? There were some, issues around her CV where she seemed to be exaggerating her own experience. Now, it's all about alleged plagiarism. It's about receiving financial resources for her academic career from the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, which is the foundation closely related to the Greens. However, that's quite normal. That's one of the main jobs of the associations and foundations, to basically support people with their academic career. So, however, there are scandals around Armin Laschet as well, which are all about the face mask selling scandal, corruption scandal, or with his role and as a minister president of North Rhine-Westphalia during the Corona crisis management, and was he lacking knowledge and the poor management of the coronavirus. However, Olaf Scholz is also being attacked as Minister of Finance with the Wirecard fraud, Cum-Ex scandal, the mismanagement of the G20 riots in Hamburg. So basically, at the moment, all we are talking about is Annalena Baerbock, Armin Laschet, and from time to time, we're talking about Olaf Scholz as well. So when we look at the candidates, what is their sympathy and performance rating when we compare those three together? Well, it's quite interesting, because in the media, we're always talking about Annalena Baerbock versus Armin Laschet. Still, Olaf Scholz is, ahead of the others, being more, popular than the others. And you can clearly see Annalena Baerbock was quite popular. However, at the moment, she is, her sympathy and performance ratings are falling, and she's in a negative area right now. So also when we look, and those numbers are significantly changing from week to week, which is quite interesting. So people are really not decided who to vote for this time round. And I experienced that in my qualitative research as well. People are always saying, I don't know who to vote for, but this time around, it seems to be really more complicated for the people. So we see 1/4 is still not decided who's the preferred candidates. Armin Laschet, Olaf Scholz being more or less on par, and Annalena Baerbock only having 18% saying she's actually the preferred candidate. And also, there is quite some doubt whether she's suitable to become Chancellor of Germany. Only not even a third says, well, yeah, she is suitable. More than 60% says, no, she's not. Armin Laschet, half says yes, half says no. Olaf Scholz is a little bit more on the positive side. And when you compare those three directly, you can't vote for the Chancellor, but still, the question is quite relevant because we know that, the candidate is so much more important at the moment than anything else. We do see Laschet compared to Baerbock. Laschet is the strong leader. Scholz versus Baerbock, again, Scholz is leading, and comparing Laschet versus Scholz is basically, head-on-head race. So I keep it short and sweet. My take on the election this time round is no one will win this election, but basically whoever makes the fewest mistakes is going to win, which is my one and only reference to football I'm going to make today. So handing over to Christian. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Yes, Jana, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. Christian, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jana, and thanks everybody for listening. I won't add another story about football for reasons. I will add a few insights into coalition politics. Let me just shift this over to here. Yeah, let me briefly tell you a few insights about coalition politics that we are likely to experience after the election in 2021. So Germany has a long tradition of coalition government, as we don't apply first past the post like in the UK, but proportional representation. We usually see many parties in parliaments, and these parties need to form a coalition to muster an absolute majority in the Bundestag that is then necessary to elect the chancellor, at least in the first round. In recent decades, we've usually seen two-party coalitions on the federal level, like a decade-long coalition of FDP and the CDU with Genscher and Kohl here, and then a few years of red-green government with Schröder and Fischer. And then we've seen now 16 years of CDU, SPD with Angela Merkel and some social democrat, which didn't keep smiling, usually for longer than 4 years. But at the same time, we've experienced in the recent decades a growing party system fragmentation in parliaments on the federal and the state level. So what you see here are the number of parties in parliament in all 17 parliaments, the average in Germany, that is the Bundestag and the Landtage. And you see here the co-varying increasing number of parties in government. So in the 1980s, it was quite sufficient that two parties or even one party could form a government. But now we see that more than two parties even sometimes enter the government on the state level. So that is on the state level, we already experience quite often three-party coalitions. For example, here you see the CDU, SPD, and Greens coalition in Saxony, and here you see the CDU, SPD, and FDP coalition, which is about to form in Saxony-Anhalt, where there have been elections in a few weeks ago. So, and in this Bundestag, in this newly elected Bundestag, we will likely see that this fragmentation will reach the federal level. So there will be many coalition options, and there might be, for the first time since the 1940s, a requirement for a three-party coalition to form on the federal level. What you see here is a projection of seats based on recent polls in the newly elected Bundestag. There is a chance for CDU and Greens to form a coalition. There is even still a slim chance that there will be a continuation of CDU and SPD. And if majority suffices for a two-party constellation, we will likely see again a two-party coalition. But most likely after the election, we will talk about these three potential constellations. So that is CDU, SPD, and Greens, or also called Jamaica, CDU, FDP, and Greens, or CDU, SPD, and FDP. A few years back, it was quite common to form pre-electoral coalitions before the election. So that is to state that one aims for a specific coalition or to exclude options beforehand. But this practice has been reduced to a few animosities, one could say. It's of course clear that there won't be a coalition with the AfD in any case, and also the left party is pretty much isolated in terms of coalition politics. But especially the middle parties of the German party systems, here you see a simplified plot of their positions based on aggregate measures on economic policy and cultural or societal policies. Especially the middle parties, that is SPD, Greens, CDU, and FDP, they will be likely to prove very flexible in negotiating a coalition. And I guess this holds particularly for the FDP. And in 2017, the FDP broke up coalition talks with the CDU and Greens with the infamous statement, better not to govern than govern badly. But now the FDP leader, Lindner, even committed to resigning if the FDP would not be part of the next government. At the same time, coalition formation, especially if there will be a three-party coalition, won't be an easy task. Back in the years, one could use money to bridge ideological gaps, but the budget will be under high pressure after Corona. And one of the important questions of coalition formation will especially refer to the budget and economic policies after the pandemic. There will be conflicts about how to deal with public debt and tax policy. The FDP, for example, committed to not joining a coalition that was to raise taxes. And of course, another line of conflict will be the speed and focus of climate policy. To date, German politicians reacted to party system fragmentation with the invention of ever new coalitions. And there is a continuous game between journalists, scientists, and politicians to coin new names for these coalitions based on the colors of flags. So, for example, CDU, SPD, and Greens government is called the Kenya coalition, pardon. And the coalition of Greens, FDP, and CDU is called a Jamaica coalition. So at the moment, politicians invent new coalitions, but they don't invent new forms of cooperation between parties. But maybe discussions after the next election will get louder that a minority government or some sort of shifting majorities would also be a potential form of government. In any case, it is very unpredictable what we will see after the future general election. And it's, I guess, the most exciting election that we've seen in decades. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Christian, for sharing those observations and the wonderful array of colours that German politics currently offers us. I see already at least one colleague's put a question in the chat, in the quick Q&A box. Please do add to those and we'll sort of introduce them. I wanted to kick off with something actually to Jana, if I may. A little bit about your sense from Berlin of how you feel the leaderships of the Greens, the SPD, and the FDP are feeling about coalition politics, because based on what Christian was telling us, if the numbers stacked up for a traffic light coalition, that would potentially be a route for the Greens to head up a government even, and for the FDP to be part of it. Equally, we saw in Baden-Württemberg recently that the Greens were happy to have the CDU as a coalition partner and not go down that route. With the SPD, undoubtedly last time there was a great reluctance in some of the membership to go back into government, but ultimately the party did that. What's your reading of the tea leaves of the parties about how they feel, or the leaderships of the parties about how they feel about future coalition?
Well, I do believe the FDP won't do the same mistake as last time round. They thought they, do themselves a favor by saying we're not going in this government before, governing wrong or badly. I do believe they understand that this was a huge mistake, so they won't do this anymore. So whatever it takes, they will be there, and they will be ready to do whatever is needed to be in government. The Greens are quite open for anything as well. My feeling is there's no reluctance to form a coalition with the Conservatives, nor do they have any reluctance to form any other form of coalition. Well, we do see other, in Rheinland-Pfalz, we do see traffic light coalition as well. So they're quite open for that as well. Basically, the same thing holds for the Social Democrats. However, there seems to be a bit more reluctance to go into a grand coalition again. They do feel they are under huge pressure. So I believe the pressure from the party members will be too big for them to, it's not going to be a walk in the park. However, at the end of the day, it's all about jobs as well. So at the end of the day, I doubt they will really say no.
Thanks very much for that. Now, I'm indebted to participants who've asked a number of really interesting questions in the chat. And if I may, I'm going to turn to Christian with maybe three of them that are somewhat linked. One was around the relationship between party and person, and this is, and then Jana, you may have thoughts on this as well. This is something of great interest, but of particular interest probably given what we've heard tonight to Social Democrats, who see a popular Chancellor candidate and poll ratings of about 15%. So, and certainly in British elections recently, people have sometimes said leaders' popularity ratings are kind of ahead of polls and show you interesting trends about what's coming. So, Christian, any thoughts you have on what matters more, party or person, would be interesting. Related to that, there was just Mark Castle asked an interesting question about where non-CDU Merkel voters go and whether they transfer across to Laschet or go somewhere else. And I can't resist as well that question about minority governments. I seem to remember, Christian, you wrote something a while back saying that Germany ought to be more open to minority government. So do you see that? Do you see that going anywhere? And then Jana will pick up your thoughts on some of those as well.
We can't hear you.
Happen. On mute, Christian, on mute. Don't worry, it's all good.
Sorry, it's my first Zoom meeting in this pandemic. Intriguing questions. What matters more, parties or persons? And I think Jana alluded to this. We've seen a swift, even more personalization of German politics in recent years, and we've experienced this particularly during the state elections. I mean, in Baden-Württemberg, in Rheinland-Pfalz, and in Saxony-Anhalt, it was pretty much the prime minister winning against the opposition, and in Eastern Germany also in a horse race between the AfD and the CDU, or in Thüringen we will see this with the Left Party and Bodo Ramelow. So, and Jana also alluded to the focus on the personal conduct of candidates, and that's why I really think that this election will be very much about the popularity of individual candidates and much more than recent elections. And this is, of course, also a problem in terms of democracy if we don't return to the content of political proposals and the substance of it. This will also be sort of a somewhat biased election, I would say. Jana, you wanna add to this, or shall I go to this to my favorite minority government question? I mean, to be honest, I'm running this topic whenever I can. For example, with regard to the state election in Sachsen-Anhalt, because I think we Germans keep practicing coalition politics of the 1950s, although everything has changed around us, particularly the party system. So there is no 2.5 party system anymore, where we could build like homogeneous 2-party coalitions of competing camps. But we have very heterogeneous party systems, and when they start to form coalitions like Kenya, which are like really, really ideologically broad coalitions, then these parties have the problem that their party labels get diluted when they force themselves to enter into compromises. And my recommendation would be that one starts at least testing arrangements like we have in New Zealand with agree to disagree clauses in coalition contracts, and that there is some room for shifting majorities. But to be honest, as long as we don't practice this on the state level, and as long as parties don't accept this as normal game in town, then I guess we won't experience this on the federal level. We will again have a few discussions after the federal election if a minority government wasn't also a viable alternative, but I guess the voices will be particularly loud that relate these formats with instability. So, but I will keep on singing this song about minority governments, because I really think that this is a viable alternative in a fragmented party system.
Well, when I'm running focus groups and I'm asking people, you know, how are you going to decide who you're going to vote for? People tell me, well, actually, who do I trust the most to run this country? So they don't refer to the parties, which they used to. They now only refer to the candidate. So do I trust him enough that he or she is able to, first of all, you know, handle Corona well and all the effects of Corona, you know, financially, jobs, blah, blah, blah. And the other one is this person able to lead the country in a digital and environmentally friendly climate, and you know, work on climate change. So those two questions are the main questions. So coming back to where do the Merkel voters go to? Well, basically they ask themselves who is going to be, we are living in a quite, you know, insecure situation at the moment. So who is going to be the one who is, you know, with a strong hand leading this country in a, you know, secure future? So whether you want to have a progressive future, think about climate change, think about changes, think about transmissions, transformations, then you might actually, they might even go to Baerbock. It's not only Laschet and Scholz, they do consider Baerbock as well. However, if you feel like you need to be more on the safe side, then Scholz is much closer to Merkel than Laschet is. So even Merkel voters feel that Laschet is rather weak, and they are not quite sure, is he able to, you know, really, you know, pull up his train, be strong and lead this country to a secure future.
Thank you very much indeed. There are a number of other questions here. Perhaps picking up on one of them, but in broadening it out a little bit. So a really interesting question is what role, if any, Markus Söder may play in the election campaign. Christian, I'll turn to you first on this, just to give you a chance to think about it. And maybe broadening that as well, we've not yet talked really about the Left Party or about the AfD. Are they going to be irrelevant sideshows in this election who are going to bubble along at a level which gets them comfortably into the Bundestag, but doesn't do very much, can't be relevant for coalitions because the numbers don't work in the case of the Left Party, and even if they did, they might not do it. In the case of the AfD, they're just way out. Or could strange things happen? Could we see one of them suddenly gain significant ground? Any reflections you got? And Christian, I know we were in touch a little bit as well around the time of the Saxony-Anhalt election. I think people might be interested to hear a little about your sense of where AfD support continues to come from in the elections. So, you know, really to both of you, the CSU, the Left Party, and the AfD. But Christian, maybe starting with you.
Yeah, interestingly, this question, Markus Söder and Saxony-Anhalt, are somewhat related, because Saxony-Anhalt was basically the last considered chance for Markus Söder, the born candidate for the chancellorship, to regain sort of the candidacy, because there were rumors when that in the case that the CDU would have basically lost the election in Saxony-Anhalt, he would be the great savior. But as we now know, Rainer Hasselhoff was the savior of the CDU in Saxony-Anhalt, and sort of partly also maybe saved the candidacy of Armin Laschet. So I think he will carry this burden with some dignity. He will regularly mock Armin Laschet, and he will be convinced that he's the best, would have been the best. A candidate that was basically in the wrong party in terms of power asymmetry between CDU and CSU, but of course he's a clever man, and he has a strategic interest in a good result in the federal election. So I think he will support the campaign, and he will support Laschet, and he would maybe aim for his shot then during the next election potentially. So these are a few words to Markus Söder, and then maybe a few words to Saxony-Anhalt and the related question, who votes for the AfD. And this also alludes to the broader question that there are basically also two campaigns maybe running. I mean, we've seen the Greens winning around 6% of the vote in Saxony-Anhalt, and in the polls we have them at above 20%. So there are different campaigns in the East and in the West, and the electoral markets are really strikingly different. And this is particularly, I would say, a problem also for the Greens, in the sense that their sort of main message that wins them votes in the West doesn't win them many votes in the East. And with regard to the AfD, one clearly has to say this recent empirical research shows that the main support comes from broader segments of the society, sort of across all age categories, and also across different income categories, with a slight bias with regard to low-income people, which might fear also job loss. And at the same time, there's a larger migration skeptic cohort in the East that supports the AfD, and this migration skeptic cohort doesn't feel represented anymore from or by the CDU since the refugee crisis of 2015.
Basically, the only thing I believe that might help the AfD to gain ground again would be if the discussion changes towards migration and refugees. And the only way that could happen at the moment is that something serious might happen, a terror attack or something like that. You know, if something like that happened, I'm pretty sure the AfD will, really gain ground again. Even now, I assume there was this case with this 13-year-old girl in Austria, which, is in the German news as well. So even that might have a little bit of an effect for the AfD. Let's see whether this is true or not. But without, having a significant external shock, so to speak, I doubt that they will play a major role, but they will, stagnate where they are at the moment.
Thank you. And Jana, if I can follow up with one question and also then raise one other which has been posed, and then turn to Christian with that one too. So any thoughts on the Left Party and how they might position themselves? And then the other, I think Vladimir Handel is getting at a very interesting point. In the UK, there are increasing talks about changing dynamics of political competition, a sense of culture wars, and sometimes I've noticed in commentary a suggestion that the Greens have profited precisely as voters turn away from what the AfD has to offer and focus on other issues. So, do you think we're seeing changing patterns of political competition? Is it your sense that environmental issues matter more now to some sections of the electorate? Do you think that there are going to be big debates which would perhaps be less common in German election campaigns in recent times around, for example, gender or trans rights, or those sort of questions? Any thoughts on that? And then maybe Christian, I'll turn to you on that point, and also Simon Davies' question about polling.
I mean, Christian already said that the electorate is really different in East and West Germany. So the left at the moment across all of Germany is around about 7%, and I'm pretty sure they will be above 5%. That's for sure. Well, for sure, but most likely. But they do suffer from internal discussions, especially around foreign politics as well at the moment. So whether they will be able to really mobilize a huge amount of their base voter kind of potential, I'm not so sure at the moment. It seems that at the moment it's kind of really, even the media is kind of focusing on the two candidates, Conservative versus Green, sometimes with Olaf Scholz being included. So we might have those three, but I'm pretty sure that the left won't play a major role in this. I don't think they will play a role when it comes to coalition discussions at all. There was always the idea of red green, where the left would be in government. I highly doubt that this will play a role at all at this year. Will we talk about different things? Well, at the moment, we're not talking about anything. So hopefully we will talk about some kind of topics. And what we do see is that climate change is not kind of, a progressive kind of only young people kind of topic. No, this is really in the middle of society. So this will play a major role. It's not only about climate change. It's kind of a shift it's kind of a symbol for future competency. So without addressing climate change, none of the three candidates or the three parties will really be able to make it, I assume. All those other questions about minority rights, whatever, they do play a role in a tiny little place of society, but not in the huge amount of society. And when you look at the age structure of German voters, this won't be a topic that might have any effect on elections.
Yeah, but let me add a few points regarding the left party. I think the outlook is pretty bleak for different reasons. We've seen them losing ground in the east, which is usually the stronghold, particularly in Saxony-Anhalt. And one problem is a conflict like between the Wagenknecht wing, which combines a more migration skeptic left redistributive policies against a more pro-migration wing, and Jana also mentioned the conflicts over foreign politics. And then there's sort of I would say, horse race effect between Greens and CDU that goes at the disadvantage of the left party. So many left party voters might also turn then to the Greens in order to strengthen the Greens. We will certainly see strong left party in Thüringen, because I'm pretty sure that we have the same horse race effect that we've experienced in Saxony-Anhalt, but now to the advantage of the left party, because Bodo Ramelow is the one and only prime minister of the left party in the beautiful state of Thüringen. Maybe 2 sentences to the question of culture wars and identity politics. At least if you in Twitter, you think that might be one of the most important topics. But I guess it isn't. It is important, I think, in terms of negatively turning against the SPD, because it's quite often argued that the SPD focuses on identity politics and sort of forgot about the simple workers that are much more interested into redistributive questions. But I think this is a sham, because the SPD also focuses on identity politics question and the minority rights, but at the same time, it's also about redistribution. But this is, of course, kind of a clever strategy to argue that the SPD is not into the bread and butter topics anymore. And yeah, I can only corroborate what Jana said about the issues in the election. It will be very much about the redistributive effects of climate policy, and it will be very much about economic recovery and how to finance this via higher debts or higher taxes after the pandemic.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much indeed for that, Christian. A couple of other interesting points have come up in the chat, in a Q&A. One is just around the reliability of polling. Maybe Christian, I'll turn to you first, and then turn to Jana on that. If you've got it seems to me German pollsters do their job very well indeed, but occasionally things haven't gone wrong. So are things reliable? And maybe in these more unstable times, maybe that'll be difficult. Also, an interesting question around polling, and again, Jana, your take will be appreciated on this as well, on coalitions rather, and your take will be appreciated on this as well. If Laschet wants to work with the FDP but needs a third partner, would he look to the Greens? Would he look to the SPD? There was a question over whether you would get an oversized coalition, so whether it might suit the CDU to bring in an extra party that wasn't needed for the numbers. I know that tends not to happen in the German context. Yeah, your thoughts on those, Christian, will be appreciated. And Jana, I'm going to turn to you with the exciting question about the role of backbenchers in a moment.
Yeah, again, Saxony-Anhalt illustrated sort of the perils of polling, because I think it was 7 days before the election, there was an INSA poll that that expected a horse race between CDU and AfD, and it is quite likely that many moderate voters turn from SPD, Greens and the left to strengthen the CDU as sort of the only viable alternative to prevent the AfD from really being the strongest party in Saxony-Anhalt, which would of course be a huge setback. The problems of polling are particularly strong in Eastern Germany because we have quite weak party identification, and electoral behavior is very volatile. So many voters only decide in the week before the election, or even at election day, or at least at the day when they send their letter to the office where they were sort of voted via Briefwahl. I think in the entire country, the problem is not that big as in Eastern Germany, but I think we will see a more critical culture with these polls, and I've seen newspapers even started publishing confidence intervals around the point estimates. So I think Saxony-Anhalt maybe was a good lesson in terms of that we need a more critical consumption of these polls. The question with regard to what would Laschet prefer, FDP or SPD, that's really speculative. I would argue that yeah, no, to be honest, I wouldn't make any bets on that. What I would bet is that we won't see an oversized coalition on the federal level. We now see an oversized coalition in Saxony-Anhalt because the FDP is actually not needed for a parliamentary majority if it wasn't the CDU in the East. There are many stubborn people, and there are many people within the CDU that would actually prefer, or some people at least, that would consider collaborating with the AfD, and there's only one vote majority in the parliament, so it makes sense in this particular case, if we don't opt for minority governments, to take the FDP within the coalition. But on the federal level, I guess this is out of the question. There's so much jobs at stake that you would have then to share with another superfluous coalition partner, so I wouldn't expect that.
Brilliant, thank you. Jana, I noticed on that point about polling reliability, you had some thoughts as well. But if I could also do share your comments on anything that Christian just said. But also, there's a really interesting question in the chat about the role of backbenchers, and certainly from a British perspective, and indeed having lived through all of the Brexit votes, where there was a significant body of Conservative rebels who were then getting kicked out of the parliamentary party and so on. This is something we would often look for. And if you end up in a position where there's a relatively small majority, will backbench MPs play a role? I remember reading many years ago that Chancellor Schröder didn't particularly enjoy sitting down with a veteran Green left-winger called Hans Christian Ströbele to discuss topics of interest, to make sure that he didn't wander off when there was a very small majority. But any thoughts you've got on any of that would be really appreciated.
Well, one word on polling. First of all, the polls actually weren't that bad. The media consumption of it was really bad. What we saw in the last election. So I highly support that the media is a bit more informed, and they're showing confidence interval and all these kind of things. I think this is more than needed. Backbenchers. Well, the role is much less significant than it is in the UK. As far as I understand the UK system, they do play a role when it comes to party organization and Fraktionszwang and all these kind of things, where we do see, or where we saw the last couple of months, especially for the Social Democrats, a lot of rumors and a lot of anger and a lot of pressure and all these kind of things on the party leaders. So there they play a really important role. And when it comes to coalition building, now I kind of try to come back to the first question. When it comes to coalition building, and the question is whether Laschet will go to the Social Democrats or to the FDP. My bet would be he'd go to the FDP, just because the hunger for power is much higher there, and therefore the ability or the openness for compromise is much bigger than it is for the Social Democrats. So here I do see that they do kind of play a role. I'm not sure whether this answers your question, but maybe you, Christian, have some thoughts on that as well.
No, yeah, I would agree with this expectation. Maybe one turn with regard, maybe it's not about the backbenchers, but it's maybe about the party base, because it has been increasingly put to the base the question of coalition contract approval. So I think was it the last election also that the Social Democratic base had to approve of the contract of the Grand Coalition, and I think it's likely that we see similar provisions after the next election. So as a party leader, you would need to anticipate what your base wants with regard to the coalition. So maybe it's less interesting what the backbenchers think, but more relevant what the party base thinks about different coalitions.
Thank you. As you'd expect, with an audience with many friends from the British-German Association, there's a question about what this might mean for the United Kingdom. I'm not sure if either of you want to pick that up in terms of the particular potential Chancellor's relationships with the UK. Give me a wave if you fancy giving that one a go. Oh, there we go. So, I mean, maybe just a quick reflection while people are thinking. I had a look at each of the party manifestos on this. And there was quite a strong common thread, although there were some differences. So in each case, there was a sort of stated ambition. I think in each case, there was a stated ambition to kind of repair relations with the UK. The FDP, surprisingly, talked about reopening or keeping open the door for the UK to rejoin the European Union, which I thought was interesting. There was also in at least a couple of the cases some interest in youth and student exchange, and certainly many of us were very sad at the demise of UK membership of Erasmus, and would love to see that return in some way or be extended, and so maybe that will be a point of focus for any future government. equally not a big topic in any of the manifestos. And the other thing I was quite struck by, it was particularly clear in the SPD, the Greens and the FDP, was that they didn't want Brexit to water down EU norms, EU regulatory requirements, and that sort of thing, and so that feels non-negotiable. And there was a question in the chat about China and Russia, I think, as well. And those seem interesting issues where actually if the Greens enter government, probably German foreign policy would move in a direction which is more closely aligned with the United Kingdom. But equally, there will be other aspects of the UK government where the Greens would feel less of a sense of kinship and natural partnership. But anyway. There's also a fun question which has popped up just at the very bottom, and again, answers from both colleagues welcome. Lothar Funk asks, will it be possible to stay in the sleeping car for Mr. Laschet and gain 30% plus, not answering important questions? So recently there's been some controversy that people might have been following about a particular controversial CDU candidate and calling into question journalistic integrity, or attacks on science, which Lothar is referring to here, and just generally keeping quite a low profile, a rather boring campaign, whether you can actually get anywhere with that. Jana, turning to you first, will Laschet need to come off the fence on some of these issues, or will it carry on in this rather mundane way?
I think it will carry on in this way because they're in a really tricky position, to be fair to them. Although I do believe it is so damn boring, and it is really, putting us all to sleep. However, I do believe that they will remain with this strategy. Because especially when you're talking about this one candidate, I mean, he's from the far right wing. So the CDU now needs to make a choice whether are we actually remaining kind of in the middle as Merkel always tended to, or do we go back to the really conservative, almost, right, not right wing, that's too much, but, going more to the conservative side. And once they do that, the CDU has some potential to show real ugly faces as well. So they're really running the risk of, that all those ugly faces being pulled out and be, shown to the rather middle kind of Merkel voters and say, is that really who you want to vote for? Is that really the CDU you want to support, losing those people? And this is a significant amount of CDU voters at the moment. There's a significant amount of voters who basically voted for Angela Merkel rather than for the CDU in the last last election. So where do they go? And if they risk of losing those voters, that is going to be really dangerous for them. So I assume, he will just stick in there for the next 80 days and be sleepy.
Yeah, but I have to agree with this, and also with the nice metaphor that you can win an election in a sleeping coach. I guess this Germany is quite a structurally conservative country, and what is striking in the current situation, there could have been a preference for change because the pandemic wasn't managed particularly well, and there were quite a few scandals around the CDU. But at the same time, there seems to be a strong desire for stability, or at least you always need to sell any form of change that it conserves the things that are existing. And it seems to me that Laschet is successful with a similar strategy like Merkel, which was called like asymmetric demobilization, that you sort of avoid the issues that could polarize, and that's why you get your voters to the poll that want to keep things as they are and don't contribute to the mobilization of maybe more progressive people that would support maybe the contents of the Greens or the Social Democrats if the campaign was about substantive policy proposals, which it isn't at the moment.
And also Merkel showed that he can basically run a country in a sleeping wagon as well, with some exceptions, but besides that, it wasn't that exciting the last couple of years, was it?
Thanks very much. Thanks very much indeed, colleagues. So I think there's one question which I think Jana relates to your talk earlier, which is in the chat around Wirecard, what that was and what that might mean for Olaf Scholz. I'm going to briefly turn to you for that, and then in concluding, and I've not warned you about this, but just for fun, for the opportunity to humiliate serious people, serious analysts and academics, I'm going to ask you to make a prediction. Who will the next chancellor be, and what will the coalition be governing Germany? So, but while you're thinking about that, Jana, quickly on Wirecard, please.
Okay, Wirecard was one of the, or maybe the biggest German finance and scandal in Germany. And there is, you know, Olaf Scholz was kind of involved as in his role as a minister at the moment. So the question was, did he know of the scandal before? Could he have done anything different? So there was an Untersuchungsausschuss. Please help me with the English word. I don't know.
A committee of investigation.
Thank you. Where it basically showed that, you know, his role was not that big. However, when we asked people, what do you associate with Olaf Scholz, this comes up and people are really angry with this. So the Scholz and the SPD are, you know, they should do anything but talk about any kind of scandal. So I think they're quite happy that at the moment, Schiss is the fan at the Green side. So kind of, you know, all of the attraction is away from them because this is still strongly associated with him. Christian, you go first with your prediction. I'm scared. Sorry.
So yeah, Christian, I was going to tell you there's a late curveball in the Q&A, and I thought you'd like to answer it, Christian. So first, you've got to answer Thomas Saalfeld's question about what the I suppose questioning the empirical evidence for Spitzenkandidaten and lead candidates being relevant in deciding elections. And once you've seen that one off, I'd like to hear your prediction. Next chancellor, next coalition, then we'll give the last word to Jana, and then we'll wrap up.
So turning to the exam question by Thomas. Hello, Thomas. Well, interestingly, this is sort of received wisdom or common knowledge at the moment that we've seen increasing personalization and that the top MPs or the leaders of the party decide the elections on the state level. We can infer this from polls, which ask people what was important for electoral decision. But actually, we're still waiting for sound political science research that shows with a incumbent dummy in a regression that this sort of effect has increased over the years. But I'm pretty sure that we might see such an effect if we would be to analyze surveys with regard to state elections. And let's not call it a prediction. Let's call it maybe what I would maybe bet after 2 pints if I had 20 pounds left. I would say it's Armin Laschet and the so-called Deutschland-Koalition of CDU, SPD, and FDP. But it's a bet, not a prediction.
I wanted to say the same thing. It's a Germany coalition, so that's a bit boring. So, okay, I do believe it's going to be CDU and Greens with Armin Laschet being the next chancellor. But I don't believe in that. I think Christian is right, unfortunately. Just for the fun, I say something different.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed for that. And I'm grateful to you for both coming off the fence there. Really, really interesting. And I think actually also challenging probably the received wisdom. I suspect if you did a kind of straw poll amongst political scientists and journalists, you might find more going in the CDU Green direction rather than, but who knows? Great, fantastic, thank you. So it's now time for us to wrap up. Thank you ever so much to everyone who's joined. It's been great having so many people with us. Huge thanks to Christian and to Jana for sharing their insights. Wishing everyone a lovely evening. Do send any comments through to British German Association or to the ISGP if you've got any ideas about future events or anything like that. If you'd like to join in a discussion like this in the future. Thank you very much indeed and have a lovely Thursday evening.